It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a hodgepodge episode for you. So questions from every corner of combat sports. But first, John, how the hell are you?
Tired. Just tired.
Is it sweeps week?
Yeah, that's been sweeps, and I got this cat here who's found new ways to wake me up to feed her in the middle of the night. She nibbles my elbows and knees. I have no idea where she got that idea, but it works because I can't sleep if someone's biting my knee.
You love that cat. Just admit it.
I do. She's all I got left. So he's good. So.
Aww. Well, it's not actually all you have left because you have questions here. So You're never alone.
Yes, I'll appreciate that.
So we are just coming off of UFC 293, and Sean Strickland upset the apple cart, upset the proverbial favorite in Israel Adesanya, and he did it. Wow, he did it very emphatically. And one of the things that he said in the post-fight presser, they asked him who he would like to fight next and what the time frame would be, because he typically fights a lot. He has a heavy schedule, and will he continue with his heavy schedule into his, the holding of this belt? And he answered, it doesn't matter who I call out or when I want to fight. The UFC says who I fight and when. Could you break that down a little bit for us and remind everyone once again about pay-per-view points and how Sean Strickland got none?
Well, typically, we'll start with the pay-per-view points. Typically a fighter, most fighter contracts, they get no pay-per-view points. Usually when you get to the top of when you get to that challenger status or a champion status, you get a contract and it'll give you pay-per-view points, but it's almost limited to the champion. You have to defend the belt to get the points. Now, there's a few former champions and big stars, Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz when he headlines events. Those guys get pay-per-view points no matter what. George St. Pierre, when he challenged Bisping, got pay-per-view points. But those are rare, very rare. In fact, they're cited in the antitrust case as very rare exceptions. For the most part, the only people that get pay-per-view points is a champion defending the title. So Strickland, as a challenger, probably got the typical boost and pay to $400,000 or $500,000 flat fee and no pay-per-view points. Now, they might have given him a discretionary bonus for winning, but nothing guaranteed on that front. So that's typical. Regarding, the UFC says when they fight, that's what fans kind of like about the UFC. It seems to be one of the number one. The number one, when fans cite what's great about MMA or UFC compared to boxing, that's one of the top things they cite is the UFC dictates the fights. And, and technically the fighter can turn down any fight, right? You need a bout agreement. So a fighter has to accept a fight, but the UFC's leverage is so great. Their contract says if you turn on the fight, they just keep extending your contract till you accept the fight that they want you to fight. So the UFC, they get to, as the promoter, they get the right to pick who you're going to fight, when you're going to fight, where you're going to fight, including a different country. That's in the contract. You have no say if you're going to fight out in the U.S. or outside the U.S. You have your contract sets how much you're going to get paid for that bout. Everything is basically determined by the UFC. In comparison, if we go to boxing, if you're a champion like Tyson Fury chose to fight Ngannou, right? That was his decision. His promoter or the sanctioning organizations had no say in that particular fight. He got to pick an opponent that gave him the most money. Now, the sanctioning organizations, if he's a champion, they can say you have to defend your belt against this person. That's a mandatory. But the sanctioning organizations can't actually force you to fight that person. They can just take the belt away if you refuse it. Where in the UFC case, I mean, we saw it with Nate Diaz. They kept putting up Chimaev as his opponent, and he kept turning down. They kept extending the contract till eventually said, okay, I'll fight the guy. Now he lucked out that he missed weight, but if they want to, they can almost compel you to fight whoever they want you to fight. And they can also say, if you don't want to defend the belt against someone, they can come up with interim belts and can make you be the champion even if you don't want to. They did that with Randy Couture. So in many ways, MMA UFC is kind of a feudal system, which fans like. Is that the fighters, again, they have they're not paid too much, so they're hungry, and they get told when, where, who, how to fight, and they do it.
For those that might be tuning in for the very first time, please break down the difference in a discretionary bonus and a side letter.
Okay. So discretionary bonus, there's actually several types of payments for fighters. So if you're not familiar with this, the UFC has a system where they pay fighters. The typical pay that everybody's usually aware of is your guaranteed show money, we call it, but it's your guaranteed purse. That's the money you get to show up and fight. When you're starting fighter in the UFC, 10,000 to show up. It could be up to 50, 100, 500,000, whatever, to show up and fight. Then there's the win bonus. Most fighters have a win bonus. You win the fight, you get additional payment, usually the same as your guaranteed amount, your purse amount. So if you're 10-10 to show up, that means you show up, you get your automatic 10,000. If you win, you get another 10,000. And then they have a couple payments on top of it. One is a pay-per-view bonus. For every buy for every pay-per-view that someone buys, they call it a buy. That every home pay-per-view, not commercial, not bars. The fighters get no cut of the bars. But at every home that someone buys a pay-per-view, and that pay-per-view outside the U.S. is above a certain amount, that fighter will get paid get a certain amount based on their contract. Typically, how it works is the standard contract may have changed since then, but the standard up to very recently was the first 200,000 buys, the fighter got nothing. From 200,001 to 400,000, they got $1. From 400,000 to 600,000, they got $2, and everything over 600,000, they got $2.50. So it's extra money, but if O'Malley's correct in what he said about how many pay-per-views his event sold, like 570,000. Well, that means that Aljamain Sterling got an extra $540,000 on top of his pay. So that's the pay-per-view bonus. And then on top of it, there's something called a side letter. And a side letter is an agreement that's attached to the regular contract, additional payment. It's a letter of agreement. So a famous one is, I think it was Anderson Silva had a side letter. He got his regular payment as the champ of 600,000 to show, 200,000 additional if he won. He had a side letter when he was fighting that paid him anywhere from $2.5 to $3 million as the champion. And then pay-per-view points would kick in at a higher amount. So there's several fighters will have these side letter agreements that pay them much higher. But again, we know from the antitrust suit, it's a very small percentage. Only a couple percentage of all the fighters have these side letters. And usually the side letters too are not. Anderson Silva's agreement is massive. Brock Lesnar, I think for UFC 200 had a $5.5 million side letter. So he made $8 million total for that event. 2.5 was reported, 5.5 additional. And then there's some fighters that Sexyama had a $50,000 side letter, I believe. So it fluctuates the range of they can pay. And then the final thing is they can give you discretionary bonus, not just the discretionary includes the fight of the night, the fight of the performance of the night used to be the knockout submission. That's the first discretionary. But just the UFC decides we are going to give you a bonus that is you have nothing written in paper, nothing contractual. We are just going to send you a check often a couple of weeks after the event because we're so happy with your event. And one of the biggest ever, we know from the antitrust lawsuit that probably the largest discretionary bonus ever gave was to Conor McGregor, over $2.7 million for a UFC 189.
Wow. Okay. You said something in there that caught my attention. You said they don't get a cut of what bars pay. And that interests me a great deal. First of all, I'd like to know, what do bars pay for a UFC?
Well, they can pay up to several thousand. It's based on the occupancy of the bar. Joe Han will go to the bar or have some go and they'll check in how many people can hold. And then they have a fee based on that. I think they average in Australia, I remember off the top of my head, they average like close to $1,000 per bar is their fee. In the US, it's slightly more. but they could have several thousand bars showing an event, right? So they can, I think on average in the past, they were collecting, was it 40, 50 million a year on their commercial pay-per-views, which are bars, which are also theaters that they show it. That's a lot of money. That's like several million per pay-per-view that they're collecting on those events. And so if you have like a boxing match, in fact, Nate Diaz, we'll do the recent Nate Diaz fight, him versus Jake Paul. Those guys, because they kind of promoted it themselves, they had the entity. And the same with, even though they weren't the promoters, the same with Spence versus Crawford, is all the money, they get a piece of all that stuff. So that's all on the table. All the sponsorships on the table for them, the pay-per-view revenue, the foreign markets, but also the commercial bars. They get a piece where the UFC, they pay you your sum amount of money. They'll pay you a bonus for pay-per-view, but the ticket sales are generally off limits to fighters. The commercial pay-per-views off limits. So the sponsorships definitely off limits. Now, especially nowadays, international television deals are off limits, except for the pay-per-view buys when you can get a piece of those. So a huge portion of the revenue streams, the fighters in MMA, UFC don't get to touch. And commercial pay-per-view is one of the things that UFC protects for themselves.
Last question about Sean Strickland. I'm going to ask you to put on your opinion hat right now and give your honest take on Sean Strickland's ability to sell pay-per-views.
It's hard for me to say. I do think there is a fan base in the UFC we've seen for that like Sean Strickland. There's a group of fans. I think he has some appeal to some fans, but he's also anti-charisma to others. I mean, it's kind of like Colby Covington, where there's some people that are drawn in and some people are actually repulsed by him. Also, there's just the appearance. Because he lost so badly to Alex Pereira recently, and the way he fights sometimes, I think that a lot of people just write him off as not a good fighter. He's probably better than I label him, but he doesn't strike you as the best middleweight in the world right now, right? I think, in fact, he's the underdog versus a lot of different opponents. So that'll probably hurt him. But I have a feeling on pay-per-view sales domestically, he will be an adequate pay-per-view attraction. Where it hurts for them is Adesanya sold a ton in Australia and New Zealand, which are pay-per-view markets. I don't see Strickland selling pay-per-views outside the US at all. So he might do okay in the US on pay-per-view. When I say okay, a couple hundred, enough that ESPN doesn't think they're losing money on the deal. But I don't see him being a major draw, and he doesn't help you in the foreign markets.
All right. So let's move on to antitrust updates, because since our last few episodes, a lot has happened. So the first thing I want to ask you is pertinent dates that we need to know about the antitrust trial.
Well, I guess the pertinent date is the judge has set the trial date, and that date is going to be April 8th of next year. That all depends on what happens with the appeal that the defendants, Zuffa, the UFC, filed. The defendants, the judge, if people are not aware, the judge granted class certification after years of waiting. In other words, he made it a class action. Because class action is considered such a big hurdle, and because the potential damages are so great, usually there's a settlement after class action, so they leave open to appeal this. So the defendants filed a petition with the Ninth Circuit, the upper court, the next court, that they want to appeal this, and they laid out their reasoning for why they want to appeal it. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce wrote an amicus brief in support of it. Then the plaintiffs, the fighters, they filed their response to the UFC attorneys, their petition for appeal. And so now we have to wait before the end of the year, because on the calendar, the Ninth Circuit should review the case. I shouldn't say they should review the whole case. That's misleading. They should look over the petition, and we will know if they're going to review the case next year. In other words, where they're going to accept the appeal and have briefs and everything next year to determine if the ruling is correct. But we could also learn that they'd reject it, and if they reject it, that means we go into trial next year on April 8th. Now, usually they reject about 80% of all appeals requests. So the odds are there statistically is that the UFC's appeal will be rejected. But there are some kind of novel, interesting things in this case and the Chamber of Commerce bringing it up. And so there's a chance, I think probably greater than the 20% chance typically, that the appeals court will look at it. But I'm right now calling it basically a coin toss. I have no honest inside information, but I just, based on the percentage, based on the novel findings of the judge, the novel nature of the case, and the low percentage of acceptance by the Ninth Circuit, I come to a 50-50. And so we'll know by the end of the year if we're going to go into trial next year. If we do, then the trial starts April 8th, and that's a pretty quick turnaround.
Can you tell us the main basis of the UFC's appeal?
Well, they're appealing on several fronts. So the main basis is they're arguing that the use of wage share is not proper by first the plaintiffs, and that the judge accepting wage share is not proper. In other words, when you measure damages in an antitrust and damages to a class, you should look just at wage level. Did your wages go up or down? Were they suppressed or not? And here they're using wage share. What percentage of the revenue are the fighters getting, right? And so they're arguing that's not proper because that's just never really used. And there's some arguments back and forth. Has it ever been used in antitrust cases or class actions or in academic? It's in academics it is, but does it cross over to the legal world? So that's one. Two, they're also arguing that they cannot prove that the damages are widespread amongst all the individuals. In other words, that the abuses of the UFC affected all the fighters the same, that there's not a commonality between them all. So that's another thing they're accusing them. They're also brought up the fact that the Hal Singer, another case that the legal expert for the plaintiffs, Hal Singer, is being reviewed by the Ninth Circuit, but that case got settled. So that probably is not going to be brought up, be looked at by the Ninth Circuit, because that's no longer, that case no longer has any standing. And so that's the primary things. And the other thing they're bringing up is they think that the use of wage share will open the floodgates to a ton of lawsuits, damage requests from other lawsuits, because it makes it so much easier for them. They're claiming that to file antitrust, lawsuits. I kind of agree with the plaintiffs on this, is that it's misleading because everybody along the way, the judge and the plaintiffs, made it clear this is a narrow finding, that wage share really should only be used in specific type of jobs like athletes, where they're the product, and it shouldn't apply to regular wage cases, monopsony cases. So I don't think that's strong, but the potential there, I think they bring it because it raises such eyebrows, it might get them to Ninth Circuit to look at it. But that's their major arguments why it should be appealed.
All right, so let's move on into our next topic, which is Francis Ngannou, Tyson Fury. Now, in a recent clip that I saw just this past week, Tyson Fury mentioned that he had helped get Francis Ngannou a $10 million purse to fight him. Now, that's all fine and good, but I was wondering what Francis Ngannou might be able to expect, or what we might be able to expect Francis Ngannou to get as far as the pay-per-view split, anything from the concessions, anything from the gate. Could you give us your, again, opinion hat on? Could you give us your opinion on how that part will shake out? And if you agree with Tyson Fury's $10 million number?
Well, I think the 10 million is probably a little low. I think it's a little higher than 10 million. I think he was just saying that as a large number to bring interest. But my understanding is Ngannou is probably going to get more than that. For the split with the pay-per-view, it's also my understanding is that most of this is guaranteed. There's not much in the way of a split because they're getting a large upfront guarantee to cover, because I guess the expectation is because it's in Saudi Arabia, because of the time it's playing, whatever, it might not, they expect it to do well on pay-per-view, but maybe not gangbusters. There is some upside apparently for Ngannou, but it's not, I don't know at what point it kicks in or how much the split is, but these are all just loose things you hear and you pick up. So who knows for sure, but I'm pretty confident he's going to get more than 10 million. You hear people throw out like 30, 40 million. I think I've said before, I think it's just going to be under like 20 million or just under 20 million. I'm going to stick to that as my guesstimate. And if it does gangbusters, then yes, he'll make some extra money. But I think the Saudis are going to want to recoup their investment first.
Okay. Speaking of the Saudis, PFL just sold a minority stake in their promotion to a Saudi company, and I believe the number was $100 million. Could you give us the details on that, please?
Well, the Saudis have they bought a portion. An entity they have, a sports company, they bought a portion of the PFL, invested $100 million of capital in them. They didn't say what percentage of the PFL they're getting. PFL apparently was the valuation of the PFL themselves have now given themselves is around supposedly over $1 billion. So you're guessing it's about 10% for that $100 million.
Wait, what?
That's the valuation. Again, one championship was getting investment money at a valuation at $1 billion at the end, right? So, and of course, one championship we haven't heard much of any new money coming in. So, and they're not making the big splash they did before. So you have to wonder how much of the money they burned through. PFL, though, is kind of in the same boat in the sense that they burn through a lot of cash. They are burning through more cash than they make. And so they need more cash. The 100 million Saudi investment, that's part of it probably is that they're happy to have the investment, but also there's commitment by Saudi Arabia apparently to put a super events in Saudi Arabia. So maybe they're getting site fees and some other income revenue from that, which would be big for the PFL. But 100 million, it sounds like a lot, but the burn rate of PFL has got to be in the $50 to $75 million range right now until they get a better TV deal or start selling pay-per-views. And so that money, as helpful it is, it's not it's not going to last long unless, again, they start bringing in revenue.
Good Lord, that's an expiration date like cheese. You don't have very long at all on that. Yeah,
well, they've raised over 300 million now. So, but again, it's the burn rate that stuff does not. They keep, they add if Ngannou fights, they can't sell pay-per-views, or they have Jake Paul fight, or let's say Jake Paul and Nate Diaz fight, and it does not do well, then they burn through a lot of money on the guarantee those guys are going to be asking for.
And well, you have to get Nate Diaz to sign first. And
yeah, that's the thing. And what are you going to get him to sign? It's going to take, I'm sure it's going to take at least 10 million plus a big percentage of the sales. Plus, he's going to ask for a lot. And when you don't have many other options, you're going to have to give it to him.
Yeah, because they're going to have to compete with the UFC hanging out Conor McGregor trilogy. And they're going to want that because that'll make a lot of money and they might outbid PFL, right?
Well, I mean, UFC is probably not going to outbid them in the sense like a percentage. Like, if you go to the boxing deal again, like someone says, we're going to give you 60% of all the revenue. UFC is never going to do that.
Right.
But if they can wave a McGregor fight out and they know that McGregor fight's going to sell 1.5 million pay-per-views, and they know it's going to outsell 3-4 times as many as any other Nate Diaz fight, let's say. Well, then they can offer a comparative purse,
right,
at a much lower percentage of the revenue, but it's comparative level of pay. So yeah, I know the Diaz camp. They've talked openly. They've been in talks or expecting an offer for the Conor McGregor fight, and they know that they have some leverage to get as much as possible. My question is, if Nate Diaz gets a great deal to come back and fight Conor McGregor, what's Conor McGregor going to say?
Right.
He's not going to want to be, on par, someone making as much or as close to what he's making.
Right. All right. So we're going to move on one more time here, and we're going to talk about the Spectrum Disney fallout, because I got a text yesterday. It was either yesterday or the day before from them. And it says, since Disney has removed their channels, we would like to offer you a free trial from our preferred streaming TV partner, Fubo. So I would like to know if the UFC will experience any impact, any kind of fallout from this whole Spectrum Disney kerfuffle.
I mean, it's possible. There's a lot of talk. Disney's trying to spin off, trying to get partners for ESPN, trying to spin off or sell it to someone else, unload it, because because of the stupidity of the executives and they're 2 feet deep into the streaming, which ended up not paying out as much as they expected. They're now all economically in trouble. And of course, they want to take it out on the actors and writers at the SAG strikes, because the Hollywood strikes, because, those guys are to blame that you guys chose these stupid models to work with. Because of that, there's a strong possibility. UFC, they were expecting a much bigger their next deal to be much bigger, right? And they had the wind at their back, and it looked like it was going to be. But just this year, things are starting to churn, and part of the problem is ESPN's financial problems. Do they want to put that much money? Can they put that much money into the UFC? The other possibility is UFC's thinking, well, if ESPN won't do it, we can go to Amazon or we can go to, Apple. But there's been talks that Disney's trying to unload ESPN with either one of them, right? Or have a partnership, which would eliminate a competitor, someone to outbid. Something that the UFC is used to is that they eliminate the rivals, so there's not multiple competing promotions outbidding each other to drive up wages. Now we can see the same thing on the streaming service side, where their expectation was that there was going to be these multiple streaming services all bidding against each other, driving up their rates. Now they're finding if they merge or something along those lines, now where is that massive bidding war going on? It's not there anymore. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. They're starting negotiations now, I believe, and next year, what is it? They have 2 years left in their deal, I believe. Let's see, it's 24. I can't remember if it's 20. They started in 2019. Yeah, 2 more years left in their ESPN deal. So next year and the year after. But by that time, they have to have a new deal in place. So it will be interesting to see what happens.
Also, to note, when I logged in on Saturday to ESPN, I got a little blurb that came up because, ESPN falls under the Disney helm, that said that my premium service, because I have the whole package with Disney, Hulu, and ESPN, and it's $19.99 a month. But I got a little blurb that said on October 5th or something along, I forget, maybe it was October 1st, whatever date it was, it's soon, that prices were going to go up from $19.99 to $24.99. So we're actually seeing the bundles go up in addition to every 18 months, ESPN prices go up.
Yeah, so. The studios, they bought hook, line, and sinker into this business model. The streaming services be this wonder future source of revenue. And now in hindsight, they look back that it costs too much to operate, too much to build up, too much to stock. Because, you're not selling your wares to one channel and you're having all these different studios put content on one channel. They're supplying their own because they own it themselves. So they got to build all this content up. And the prices keep going up. So yeah, it's an amazing boondoggle it's turned out to be. And now the amazing thing is they've realized that cable was that streaming might be the future, but they should have delayed on it and kept cable around that's paid more. It was a much more lucrative model, but now they've destroyed the cable model because everybody's cut their cord in the last 10 years.
They sure have.
And so they can't go back to that.
Wow. I do have one last question for the episode. Tonight, as we're recording this on Monday, September 11th, tonight is Vince McMahon's last day of total control of the WWE, because the UFC-WWE merger is expected to fully go through tomorrow. Could you refresh us and give us any information that we should have?
Well, I guess the refresher is the WWE and UFC. The UFC is owned by Endeavor. Endeavor has struck a deal with the WWE that they're going to merge. The UFC is going to be split off from Endeavor and merge with the WWE and do a whole new company. That company is going to be called TKO, and it'll be traded on the markets. You can start buying stocks tomorrow in it, publicly traded. And majority shares are going to be controlled by Endeavor, 51%. The 49% are going to go to the current WWE shareholders. When the WWE was a self-contained entity, even though he only owned something like 20 to 30% of all the shares, Vince McMahon, he had 80% of the voting rights. And same with and Endeavor was the same with their stock with Ari and Witzel. They have all the voting rights. So the voting rights is, again, the Endeavor, a few guys are going to have all the voting rights in TKO. The regular shareholders are going to have no say in that company, but they're going to merge, and they're setting a price at $21 billion to start. I got a feeling it ain't going to be that high. $21 billion seems a little inflated, but it's going to be an incredibly the valuation is still going to be ridiculously high. So that would say from when they bought the UFC for $4 billion in 2016, it's now has tripled in value to $12 billion.
Question. If you had a spare $1,000 that somebody gave you and said, you must invest this somewhere, would you be willing to invest in TKO?
Right now, no. I think even though there's the odds are not high, and I think the market it bears this out. It's not high like the antitrust case is going to derail the company. There's actually a monopoly case too against the WWE. The potential there, the tail end of those cases, the almost like a white swan effect, the potential for something massive there is so great. If there is something in either of those cases, it could completely derail the company, and I think it'd be too great a risk. Even if the odds of that happening are small, you're talking about an incredibly huge impact on their business if either case, the WWE case or the UFC case, progresses to the point where there's some sort of major settlement or ruling. And so, I mean, I guess if you want to do short term, if you want to invest short term, and you think it's going to be go up with all the fans buying shares. But on a long-term investment over several years, I wouldn't put money into it.
Well, all right. And there you have it, folks. Today's hodgepodge episode. If you would, do us a favor and subscribe, because we need all the help we can get to keep our happy little family together. And if you are already a subscriber, please share this far and wide so we can maybe snag a few more subscribers. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to John, and he is going to tell us what he has coming up and what he might have put out in the past 2 weeks that we don't know about. John, take it away.
Oh, well, I'm having stage fright, freezing here, just frozen in place. I can't remember anything I've done or anything I got coming up. What do I have coming up? I have several things in the works. Don't know what. No, I actually have a piece I've been working on a long time about how to fix my plan to fix boxing based on comments by Errol Spence, Bud Crawford, and other boxers in the last few weeks or months. So that hopefully I'm swamped at work right now, so probably going to take another week or two. I have a piece planned for Ngannou the month after. That's I'm in the works on that. And recently, I'm sure I've written some. Oh, I did an interview. People haven't heard it. Go back and listen to our interview with Rob Macy, which had just a chock full of nuggets. I'm somewhat shocked that people haven't picked up on some of the stuff he talked about.
All right. So there you have it, folks. You know the drill. Until next time, please stay safe.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!